Welcome to the Hanshaw Horizon podcast, where we explore learning science and all the tools you need to create a high-performance learning environment. Today, we're going to dive in and look at some theories and strategies to help you create that high-performance learning environment, whether you're an instructor or instructional designer. Welcome to the Hanshaw Horizon podcast, where we dive in and look at learning science and how to make the high-performing classroom. And today, we're going to look at the many hats that an instructional designer or instructor that builds their own courses have to wear in order to create that high-performing classroom. And we're going to have a little bit of fun with it. So we're going to call it the Content Conjurers, the Methodology Masters, the Research Radicals, the Collaborators and Consultants, the Assessors and Evaluators, and the Accessibility Advocates. So that's how we're going to kind of dive into this and take a look. So the first step is the Content Conjurers. In order to be a good content conjurer, the first thing we have to do is weigh in on the learning objectives, see what the needs of the learners are, because we want to create things that are learner-centered. So weigh in on those curriculum objectives, make sure they are learner-centered, see what they are, see if they're going to actually help the learner, and then dive in and take a look at the learner needs. And then once you have the learner's needs identified, then guess what we're going to do? Then we're going to dive in and see what works for them the best. And as you know, what I think works for them the best, distributed practice. That is a mainstay of what we do, predicting distributed practice. But it really has to do, there's a whole lot of other things that we can use to conjure the content, a whole bunch of other methodologies that we're going to get to on the next one when we talk about methodology masters. But for this one, we're looking at diving in, taking a look at those learning objectives, seeing what those learner needs are, and seeing the best way that they can get, the learners can get to where they need to be in terms of learning. What level of learning do they need to get to? So that's kind of what we want to do as content conjurers, because remember, lecturing ain't learning. There was a book that telling ain't training. Well, lecturing ain't learning. The telling ain't training book came from the ATD, so the talent development folks, and lecturing ain't learning. Especially if you think you have to lecture, then guess what? You're not, people really aren't learning from it. You can have a lecture, but then have pieces and parts and active learning all throughout, because active learning is where they really make it their own. So that's part of the idea or instructor piece of being a good content conjurer. Because what I always tell my students is, and believe it or not, if you hear me lecturing, that I'm not prepared. If you're doing most of the work, then I am totally prepared. So we want the learners to do the work to get the learning, because that's how it sticks. So that's part of being the content conjurer. IDs and instructors creating their own courses are also methodology masters, the masters of methodology. And one thing has really come around in the past 6 months that helps us really engage with active learning and doing a whole bunch of really cool stuff, so we can take our different methodologies, such as active learning, where you can use like a think, pair, or share, or just about anything to help the learning stick. And that's AI. AI has come so far where we now have chat bots. We now have helpful tutors that aren't going to do the work for us. What are they going to do? Or they're not going to do the work for the student. They're going to teach them how to do the math problem, how to write an essay, how to whatever it may be. So they'll actually act as a tutor, and they do a really good job. And that makes it active learning, because they're going back and forth, and the AI tutors are actually asking questions. But what if we don't have access to an engaging AI tutor and things like that? Well, we still have active learning. We still have, if you've listened to my other podcast, Kavanaugh talks about putting emotion into learning, creating curiosity. Curiosity is one of the biggest things that we can do, that we can create to help make that learning stick. So how do we create that curiosity? Well, you know me, I like to use prediction to help create that curiosity and have people predict how it's going to pertain to a part of their life, or what they're going to learn, or whatever it may be. So having thought-provoking questions right in the beginning are a great way that we can be that methodology master and really create active learning, so students can engage with the content prior to even learning about it. Now, once they've learned it, or I can't say learn it. Once they've learned it, once they start engaging with the content, then there's so many ways that we can do it. We can do, like I already alluded to, the think, pair, share for active learning. We can have quizzes that they take a quiz, answer a question, and they get immediate video feedback or some type of feedback from an AI entity as well. And it can be a lot of fun when we start using avatars, things like that. And also another methodology that I really love using that creates that emotion in there is to use test cases, to use different scenarios where they have to really think things through. And in these scenarios, there's never the perfect solution. There's always things that go well, but it also has a negative effect on other things. So I like to go through a scenario, come up to a conclusion, and then identify what went well, and then what are some outcomes, negative outcomes that are going to happen from making those choices. So I really love doing things like that as well, because there's always more than one way to do things. And then the next thing, research radicals. Reason why, if you're an instructor creating their course or an instructional designer, we need to be a research radicals, because we're constantly learning. We're constantly finding out what actually works. And my team, we actually have a mural board that we look at, and we say, oh, okay, we have mindset, grit, Kavanaugh with the emotion, the systems thinking one, system one thinking, system two thinking, things like that. So I will actually share that link to the mural board so you can see some of the stuff that we look at and pick from to create really engaging courses where that learning sticks, so it becomes that high performing classroom. And there is no secret to it. You can just go in and say, okay, for this topic, whatever it may be, is it biology, is it math, something else from STEM, something from um, the study of arts, liberal studies, what is it from? And then pick out different strategies and methodologies that you can use that will help move the content forward and stick with the person that's engaging it. Because remember, one-way content, no good. Two-way content where the learner is interacting is excellent stuff. So speaking of that, for two-way content, so this is a one-way content right now, but we can make it two ways. How can we make it two ways? Put something in the comments section, like and subscribe, make a comment in there asking a question or making a statement of something that you've done that has worked really well to engage with a certain methodology. We are also assessors and evaluators. So what does that mean? Well, not only are we evaluating and assessing students, but we're evaluating and assessing the class that we built as well. So remember, it's not just about evaluating the students. Did they learn? That's a part of a larger evaluation. Is our course doing what it's supposed to do? Does it bring that learner to the level of learning they need to be, whether it's a higher ed course, an industry course, hands-on, whatever it may be? Are we getting the learner where they need to be? And if it's in the corporate world, is it acceptable, an acceptable place for the organization? So we have to satisfy the organization and the learner as well, which is kind of cool because that gives us more opportunities to do a fantastic job. And I love, so when we assess, we can look at, okay, let's assess, we're going to assess the learners. How do we do that? Well, Kirkpatrick gives us the 4 levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Level 1 is that smile sheet. What kind of data do we get from a smile sheet? Well, if we write them poorly, guess what? We don't get much from that evaluation. If we write them from a learner-centered perspective, we can get a lot of rich data. So if you're asking a question that starts out, I feel that the course was, man, you're missing the mark. The target is here and you are shooting over here. That initial survey should be, I am able to use what I learned, or I am able to do whatever it may be. So link back to the objectives of what that learner is able to do. And that's a more healthy, better way to look at the course to see if it's doing its job. And then level 2, that's where we're going to like test. What kind of test? Is it a hands-on? Is it a written? Is it a project? what is it? And then level 3 is a behavior. And level 4 is if they're going back to the job, are they able to transfer those skills? And you don't know about that until maybe 6 months later. We like to give a 6 months gap between the time when we evaluate if they're able to bring it to work and be successful at using those skills on the job, because that's hugely important, because sometimes there's things that get in the way. You may train them correctly and do the right course and everything else, but when it comes to bringing it back on the job, there's things that get in the way. So if they're not able to bring it back to the job, why? Is it something with the training, or is it something that gets in the way? Time constraints, crazy supervisors that yell too much, incorrect tools, different materials. What could it be? So there's so many different things that could happen. So if they're not able to transfer those skills onto the job, then that is a fantastic time to get curious and really troubleshoot and find out and dive back into the needs assessment process. So that's how we assess a program, a course, anything else. But remember, we're also assessing and evaluating the learning. Did it occur? And that's through really the testing. So the level 2, is the test testing what it's supposed to test? And is it aligned with the objective? So if we have misalignment, if we have tests that don't test the objectives, or tests that, and we do this all the time, tests that supposedly just test something that is not completely aligned to the objective, but it seems important. Have you ever done that? Because I see it all the time, especially in written tests. When we have a written multiple choice test or written test, does it take us to the level of learning that we need to be at in terms of the objectives? It's very hard to take a multiple choice test and put it at a level where you're able to apply the knowledge that you have, test the application of that. So it's very difficult in a lot of hands-on things. So that multiple choice test really doesn't do that. So you need a project, something else. So does the test fit the objectives, and will it fit the needs of that organization as well? So that's kind of where we are with assessment and evaluation. And my favorite part, one of my favorite parts, is we are accessibility advocates. Because if we're building training, we're building learning stuff, we're building courses, and it's only available to a select few people because we don't use caption. I have words on the bottom of this because, well, let's face it makes it better for everyone. It makes it better for me if I'm listening to this podcast, if I'm watching the podcast here on YouTube. I'm able to read it, and it keeps me engaged. Things are moving, so it keeps my scatterbrained mind focused on what it is. But that's just one small piece. We want to look at accessibility standards through the WCAG standards and see what we really need to do to meet the level of accessibility that we should, so we can get everyone engaged with the course. So that's hugely important. So if you haven't looked at the WCAG standards, I would really advise you to take a look at the latest standards and look and see what they have, because it's not just closed captioning. It's using all sorts of stuff. When you have pictures, when you have whatever it may be, when you have audio, what are we doing with all that? How are we making this so it's accessible for everyone? If I am visually impaired, are all these wonderful graphics accessible to me? How do I explain them? If I am hearing impaired and I have to study something about a musical, how would someone who's hearing impaired engage with a musical? How would they go to the theater? How would someone with a hearing impairment go to the theater? So kind of as you're building your courses, think from another perspective. And I saved our collaboration one for last, our collaborators and consultants, because if you can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes, collaborate with somebody who can. And then you're going to get a whole lot of fantastic insight. So if you're thinking, well, my course doesn't need to be accessible for someone with a hearing impairment, well, ask somebody with a hearing impairment. See what they do, because they are going to experience that course in a way that is different than someone without a hearing impairment. So it's kind of cool when we think about it and we put ourselves in in the different mindset of, okay, how would somebody else experience this course? So not just really create something that's accessible and meets the standards, but step back and try to put yourself into the shoes of someone with, a visual impairment, hearing impairment, whatever it may be, and see how they experience the course, and then use your collaboration tools to really ask, find out, see what the reality is. Because it's kind of cool when we put our ego at the door and ask others what they do and how they experience our course. So that is the most fun thing for me. Ask people how they're going to experience your course and get multiple perspectives. And a bonus for this one are the 3 skills that a designer, anyone building a high performance course, needs. And the first one, we alluded to this when we talked about being a consultant: build authentic relationships. Building authentic relationships is critical. Now, if you're not building relationships authentically and you're just doing it for an outcome, that has a certain smell to it. And people smell it really quick. So don't be somebody just building relationships to get to an outcome. Build authentic relationships because you care about individuals as the human beings they are. So build those authentic relationships. That is the number one job of any instructional designer or instructor. Build authentic relationships. And then the second one is adapt to organizational and industry needs. So if you're building a course and you're looking, let's say, at assessment, and all of a sudden something comes up, the shop changes the materials, whatever it may be, use that as an opportunity to adapt. And as you adapt, you're able to build even more relationships. So use those opportunities for you to adapt, to really get better, and to role model adapting for others to see and to show that you put the organization above yourself. So you're adapting. That is hugely important. And then communicate in a way as you're building these relationships. Communicate in a way that is important to the people you're communicating to. So I'm not saying change the message or say one thing here and another thing here. I'm saying the way you communicate it is different. What's funny to me is my wife can tell who I'm talking to just by the way I'm talking, because not because I'm changing the message is the same, but the way I'm conveying it is slightly different. So those are the 3 key elements of being an idea, or the 3 key skills, I should say: build relationships, adapt, and then communicate. Well, I should say build authentic relationships, communicate in a way that people care, or adapt to all the changes, and communicate in a way that people care. So that's it. That is a sneak peek into building high performance courses.